General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow had always believed she could control every variable, every risk, every moment that might threaten the scheme she had built around Drew's captivity. For months she lived by a strict routine, precise dosages, strict timing, and an obsessive vigilance that bordered on paranoia. It was the only way to maintain the illusion of Drew's permanent paralysis, the only way to ensure he remained locked inside a prison no one else knew existed. But ambition has a way of blinding even the most disciplined minds, and as Willow's political aspirations grew, her grip on the dangerous secret she carried began to loosen. And then came the mistake, not a dramatic misstep or a calculated risk, but something painfully human she simply forgot. One missed injection. One interruption in her schedule. One oversight that unraveled everything. At first, Willow didn't even realize what she had done. She was too consumed by her new campaign obligations meetings, strategy sessions, endless conversations about influence and future legislation. Nina's encouragement had inflated her confidence, feeding the idea that she was destined for a seat of power, that she deserved more than the life she currently lived. And while she rehearsed talking points and prepared speeches, a completely different reality was unfolding behind closed doors. The paralysis that had kept Drew motionless, docile, and safely contained began to fade. The numbness in his limbs receded like a tide pulling back from the shore. A spark of sensation returned to his fingers, a twitch of muscle, a subtle awakening that Drew had not felt in months. At first, Drew didn't dare believe it. Pain flared in his legs, pricking like needles under his skin, and agony, yes, but also proof that something had changed. Something had gone wrong for Willow. The paralysis was wearing off. As Drew struggled to move, Willow breezed through her day with the illusion of control still intact. She had no idea that her greatest mistake had already passed, that the moment had slipped through her fingers in the chaos of ambition. She assumed Drew lay helpless, frozen exactly where she wanted him, unaware that the man she had suppressed so thoroughly was slowly regaining strength. But the truth was unfolding faster than she could imagine, and every second brought Drew closer to the moment he would open his eyes fully, not with confusion but with fury. By the time Willow discovered her lapse, it was already too late. She returned home in a rush, flushed with excitement from a successful meeting, only to find the house steeped in an unfamiliar silence. A silence that didn't belong. A silence that suggested movement, unauthorized movement. Her pulse tightened as she hurried down the hallway, rehearsing explanations to herself, convincing her racing mind that Drew was still asleep, still incapacitated. But deep down, she felt the dread pooling in her chest. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. And then she saw it, the overturned water glass. The indent left on the sheets where Drew's body had rested for months, the faint drag mark across the hardwood floor. Signs that he had moved, signs that he was no longer where she left him. Willow's breath caught the nightmare taking shape before her eyes. Drew was conscious. Drew was capable. Drew was gone. The realization hit her with the force of a collapsing world. Her biggest fear had materialized because of her own negligence. She had forgotten the injection, the one thing she could never afford to forget, and now the man she had drugged, manipulated and imprisoned, had the strength to stand, to think, to run. And worse, he had every reason to expose her. Panic pulsed through Willow's veins as her carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Without Drew under her control, everything she had done, every lie, every manipulation, every calculated step became a ticking bomb. If Drew escaped and revealed the truth, she wouldn't just lose her political ambitions. She would lose her freedom, her family, her future, everything. What she feared most was no longer hypothetical. It was happening. Drew could be anywhere outside the house, crawling toward the road for help, or already upright and planning his next move. He had months of anger stored inside him, months of betrayal to process, and now the physical ability to act on it. Willow wasn't just facing a setback. She was facing a complete reversal of power. The prisoner had become the threat. The captor had become the hunted. In that chilling moment, Willow understood the true cost of her ambition. One forgotten dose, one faltering moment of focus, had unleashed a disaster greater than anything she had ever anticipated. Drew's freedom meant her downfall, and no matter how quickly she scrambled to fix her mistake, the damage was already irreversible. The catastrophe had begun, and it was coming straight for her. Willow had imagined her inauguration day 1,000 times, the cameras flashing, the applause rising, the polished speeches and promises of a brighter future. She believed the moment she placed her hand on the Bible and repeated the oath of office would be the culmination of every sacrifice she had made, every risk she had taken, every lie she had carefully layered in pursuit of power. What she did not imagine, what she could not have imagined, was the figure stepping out from the shadows just as she took her place at the podium, a man the world believed to be incapacitated, a man she believed she had buried in silence and paralysis forever. Drew Kane emerged into the light at the exact second her name echoed across the chamber, shattering the illusion of victory and signaling the beginning of her end. His appearance was not dramatic by design, it was chilling in its simplicity. Drew, gaunt but standing, bruised but alive, made his way forward with a resolve forged in months of suffering. Every step he took was a declaration that he had survived her poison, her manipulation, her cruelty. And as Willow's smile faltered mid-sentence, as recognition flashed in her eyes like a struck match, the entire auditorium fell into a stunned hush. The cameras did not stop rolling. The microphones did not mute. Millions of viewers witnessed the exact moment Willow's carefully curated empire began to crumble. Drew did not need theatrics. His testimony was his presence. His survival was the accusation. But he offered much more evidence of the injections, records of the drugs, photographs of bruises, and the truth of how Willow had kept him paralyzed for months in an act that went far beyond cruelty. It was attempted murder packaged as control. It was power twisted into violence. And now it was the key to her downfall. He stepped forward, voice firm but shaken from the weight of everything he had endured, and made his accusation publicly. He named the woman standing at the center of the stage as his captor, his poisoner, his would-be executioner. For a brief moment, Willow tried to recover her composure, convinced she could spin the event as a delusion, a misunderstanding, a smear campaign. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the presence of the man she had sworn could never walk again made her excuses evaporate before they left her mouth. The audience reacted first with whispers, then with gasps. Then with outrage as the magnitude of her crimes settled over the room like smoke. Willow stood frozen the podium, no longer a symbol of triumph, but a witness stand where her sins were laid bare. Every ounce of power she believed she had claimed vanished the moment Drew reclaimed his voice. His liberation became the strike that dismantled her political aspirations and extinguished any hope she had of hiding the truth. The story shifted instantly. No longer was Willow the rising star, the devoted mother, the polished candidate. She was now the villain of her own narrative, a woman who had betrayed her marriage, manipulated the justice system, orchestrated Drew's disappearance, and nearly taken his life in a desperate attempt to control the world around her. The public's faith shattered with a soundless but devastating finality, and even those who once defended her began to distance themselves with alarming speed. Meanwhile, Drew stood taller with each passing moment. Freedom imbued him with a strength that had been stolen from him, and as reporters rushed forward, cameras turning toward him rather than Willow, a new narrative began to form. It was not only about justice, it was about reclamation. Drew reclaimed his autonomy, his truth, and his place in the world. But he also reclaimed the balance of power. For months, Willow had controlled the story, weaponizing lies and silence. Now Drew held the upper hand, and he intended to use it. The legal machinery activated instantly. Investigators moved forward, staff members detached from Willow like debris breaking off a sinking ship. And the crowd began to demand action. The resignation she had once dreamed of forcing on others now awaited her instead. She was ushered away. No longer a public servant but a criminal under scrutiny, her downfall complete even before she was handcuffed. In those moments, Willow's life collapsed with brutal precision. Her secrets were exposed, her ambitions dissolved, and her reputation incinerated in the blaze of Drew's survival. Everything she had manipulated, every lie she had crafted, every harm she had inflicted, spiraled back to destroy her in a matter of minutes. The ending of her story was not whispered or delayed. It was announced in front of the entire country. Her fate was sealed the moment Drew stepped forward, alive, aware, and ready to bring her world crashing down. And as the echo of her shattered legacy faded, one truth remained stark and undeniable. Willow's end had finally been confirmed. The revelation of Willow's crimes should have been the end of the story, the final chapter in a tale of manipulation, control, and cruelty. But poor Charles had no idea that her downfall was only the beginning. Beneath the layers of deceit, beneath the months of silent suffering Drew endured, a darker truth waited to surface, one that tied Willow's twisted plot to someone far more calculating, far more dangerous, and far more invested in keeping Drew silent. That man was Sidwell, the architect behind the scenes. The strategist who believed he could manipulate political landscapes with the same ease he manipulated people. And the moment Drew stepped back into the world, Sidwell's greatest secret, his criminal blueprint, cracked open like a fault line ready to swallow them all. The connection between Willow and Sidwell was not an accident. It was a partnership built on fear and ambition, Willow desperate for control over her collapsing life, and Sidwell eager to harness her desperation for his own gain. He had coached her, encouraged her, shaped her cruelty into a weapon he could use. The immobilization of Drew was not merely a personal betrayal. It was Sidwell's insurance policy, a way to eliminate Drew from the path of political influence and ensure the congressional seat remained in the hands of someone malleable, someone indebted to him. Willow had become the tool and Sidwell the puppeteer. But Sidwell made one fatal miscalculation. He underestimated Drew's will to survive. Once Drew regained his strength and exposed Willow publicly, Sidwell hoped the scandal would end there, that Willow would carry the full burden of blame while he quietly erased his involvement. But Drew's awakening had sharpened something in him, a clarity forged through pain. He remembered conversations overheard through half-conscious fog voices whispering in the next room. The metallic click of Willow's phone as she relayed Sidwell's instructions. He remembered enough to know that Willow wasn't acting alone. And now that he stood in the light again, he had only one objective: destroy everyone who played a part in his suffering. The more Drew spoke, the more the threads unraveled. Investigators began connecting financial transfers, encrypted messages, suspicious meetings, and a disturbing pattern of influence exerted by Sidwell over key figures in Washington. What had once appeared to be Willow's frantic attempt to hold on to her life now looked like the carefully constructed arm of a larger conspiracy. Port Charles buzzed with the revelation, trembling with the knowledge that the scandal extended far beyond domestic betrayal. This was political corruption. This was attempted murder tied to ambition. And Sidwell stood at the center. As the truth spread, panic rippled through Sidwell's camp. Every lie, every cover-up, every threat he had issued now hung like a noose above his head. And Drew, no longer immobilized or silenced, became the force Sidwell feared most, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to expose. Drew's determination hardened into something fierce and unstoppable. He had endured months trapped inside his own body, unable to scream or move or fight back. But every moment of paralysis had fueled a quiet fire within him. Now that he had reclaimed his voice, he would tear down the empire that allowed his suffering. He would crush Sidwell's network, dismantle his alliances, and drag every hidden truth into the light. Sidwell had tried to erase Drew. Now Drew would erase him. The media erupted. Headlines warned of a political implosion unlike anything the town had seen in years. Analysts speculated about indictments, federal intervention, and the collapse of Sidwell's influence. The air crackled with tension as Port Charles braced for impact. And behind it all, Willow's once independent crimes now stood as proof of a deeper, darker machine, one that Drew was ready to destroy. What made the unfolding disaster even more shocking was the speed with which Drew moved. He gathered evidence aligned with investigative teams, and prepared testimony so explosive it could destabilize several major players in Washington. His comeback was no longer just personal vindication, it was an assault on an entire corrupt system. Drew was no longer the victim. He was the reckoning. Meanwhile, Sidwell scrambled to regain control, but every attempt failed. The narrative had already shifted, and the walls closed in on him from every direction. His secrets were spilling into the open, his allies abandoning him, his influence dissolving like smoke. He felt the same sense of entrapment Drew had endured. Except Sidwell's paralysis was psychological fear, replacing confidence, desperation, replacing strategy. And as the story reached its boiling point, one truth became painfully clear: the disaster wasn't merely brewing. It had already begun. Willow's downfall had cracked the dam, but Drew's pursuit of justice was the flood that followed, merciless. Unstoppable, cleansing everything in its path. The catastrophe awaiting Sidwell and Willow was absolute. Their empire was collapsing, their crimes revealed their future slipping away. And the man leading the charge, the man they thought they had defeated, was now the force tearing them apart. This was not just justice. This was vengeance wrapped in truth. This was Drew reclaiming the power they stole from him. And it marked the beginning of the end for both Sidwell and Willow.